So could you maybe speak to some kind of like key points in the business, along the way to where you're at today?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, if I were to break down the key points, I think that there's just different eras of Grailed. I think that, the first chapter of Grailed, if I were to sort of describe it, was more just like try our best to keep up with the growth, and grow the team and start like experimenting with things. And so, excuse me, I've developed like an addiction to Topo Chico over quarantine. I just like crush seltzer water now, or sparkling water. Excuse me. And so anyway, I digress. Whereas like for the first few years, a lot of what I was trying to do in the engineering seat was grow the team and get as much talent as I could from previous gigs in the tech community in New York as I could. Whereas Arun was mostly focused on like, okay, like what is the strategy? Also, we have a little bit of money now to play with because we had just raised our first round. How do we like most effectively deploy that capital, and what does that look like? So he was sort of like, I think one thing that Arun and I have always done well is that we've had like a very healthy sort of like split and complement of skill sets. Whereas like, him and I we don't overlap very much in our day to day. Whereas like I see a lot of like co-founders like have that issue. And so like I think the first few years of Grailed, we did really well because he was able to focus on an entirely different aspect of the business and vice versa, without us like stepping on each other's toes. And like so I think for the first few years, there's like a lot of highlights where it's like, when I first started working on Grailed with Arun, we didn't have an iOS app. We had growth, but we had $0 in revenue. It wasn't like sort of a self-sustaining initiative. There was a very like strict runway that we were always working against. And that's the first chapter, I would say. So we launched the iOS app. We started charging 6% in I think it was like February of 2016, something like that. And that sort of like was a Rubicon for the business where there was no looking back after that. Like Grailed was like a self-sustaining entity that was going to exist forever, regardless of like many things that happened. I think, maybe that's not entirely true. I think that there's like a lot of different challenges the business has faced as it's scaled. One thing we've noticed is that it becomes like much more expensive to scale something than I ever thought it would be. And so, but that was like, sorry, I'm like kind of all over the place right now. The first chapter of Grailed was very much like, let's like fully realize the product market fit that we've like somewhat validated by building out an iOS app, trying to get into like the hands of as many people as possible, sort of compete for like the screen real estate that was monopolized by a few apps at the time. And then let's also like, secure sort of like the business's future in a way. We like from day zero, we never wanted to be the type of business that was like, on a cash cycle, unhealthy cash cycle, sort of like burning it constantly, especially after like my days at Venmo, knowing it, like how stressful that was, and like never knowing what tomorrow would bring, and so that was the first chapter. I'd say the second chapter was mostly around operational excellence. And so the first chapter of any startup is the story was the same thing at Venmo. Was it was a little like fast and loose. We didn't really have a lot of processes in place that everyone was subject to, and sort of like kept rigor high across the entire business. We hadn't really established like a philosophy or a set of operating principles that we follow pretty strictly now. And all of that was prompted by raising our A. And so I think at the time we had we didn't really have like too much. The concept of a board for us didn't really exist for the first few years because it didn't need to. We were like very focused and like sort of like charted. We were in charted waters. Like I had already done that phase of a company before. Arun had our as well. Arun, for context, went through YC in like 2009, like one of the first batches. Like, yeah, he was there early on. And so he had his first company, which was called WakeMate, that I think made like the first set of sleep trackers. It's pretty cool actually. So but he had like a lot of experience with the first phase of a business. And so for him and I, we were operating in a world we were familiar with at that time. And so there wasn't really a need for like a ton of oversight, I guess I could say, until like we raised our A. And I think that was actually one of the best things that we've done, was raise an A, because sort of like filled out the board with extremely experienced or a lot of experience. And that experience helped us navigate a bunch of things we needed to navigate, but also helped us operationalize the business, sort of like surface the priority of like building out crucial teams internally and building out processes to like make sure, yeah, as I said, we had rigor being applied to everything. So like, for example, when we raised our A, we didn't have a product team. It was kind of just like, Room was like motivating all the product work, which was great and worked out really well for a while. But like he was the CEO, there's not enough time in the day to be both the CEO and also head of product. And so we built out a product team. We didn't have an analytics team, for example, and that now it's like the one team that sort of like drives every decision we make. And so that I think that's the defining sort of story for the second chapter. First chapter was sort of like, build out everything we need to sort of capture as much of capture and realize as much of the potential as possible. The second chapter would be like operational excellence across the board. Operational excellence, whether it's like recruiting, analytics, product, office management. It doesn't even sound crazy, but like, it's absolutely required in a co-located environment. And so forth. And I would say that chapter started in April of 2018. I know there's a little bit of a gap there, but and then most recently it's scaling. It's scaling. So it's like we have every fundamental and foundational team we need in order to scale. Everything exists now, and now it's just like the marketplace is operating at a scale that the current size of the team cannot support well, at least. So a lot of our focus is just on scaling the team.